Welcome to episode 5 of Surviving Opioids Beyond an Epidemic podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Sabone. On this show, we talk about opioid addiction and we talk recovery. The guests are all folks who either research addiction, work in the therapeutic setting, some who have lost family members, and others who have personally lived through their own experience with a crisis and are now thriving on the other side of the chaos. This show is for anyone who wants to know that although there's been a lot of tragedy, there's also a lot of hope. On today's episode, we have Renee St Pierre. Renee grew up with an otherwise uneventful upbringing, but still developed a severe run with an opioid addiction and is now several years free from that dependency. He considers himself a cannabis expert and has found cannabis to be a big part of his own life today. He rejects the mainstream full abstinence approach to recovery that gets forced upon most people with opioid addictions and feels that the whole approach has been misguided. Since there has been so much debate and controversy in the news recently about marijuana and that tongue-in-cheek expression California sober as an approach to recovery for opioid addicted people, I wanted to have someone on that can speak to that side of the issue from personal experience. Randy's a good friend of mine, he's a good guy, and I hope you guys enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. Enjoy the episode. Hello and welcome to episode 5 of Surviving Opioids Beyond an Epidemic podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Simone. On this show, we talk all things opioids, addiction, and recovery. And today's episode is no exception. We have Rene St Pierre. Okay, he's 3 years removed from a wild opioid addiction. He's been on this incredible journey of healing, and he does it a little bit differently, than the mainstream model tells you that it needs to be done. He doesn't subscribe to the abstinence-based one-size-fits-all model of recovery. And he feels that our current approach is not just ineffective, but it's actively working against most people who turn to it looking for help. So Renee, thanks for coming on the show. Thanks for agreeing to share a little bit about your story.
First off, I'm used to this my whole life. My name's spelled Renee, and it's pronounced rainy, so rainy like the weather.
Rainy. Oh, I apologize.
It is a common thing. I'm used to it.
So sorry. Like before, I kind of want you to get into it. I do just want to talk to the listeners for maybe 2 or 3 minutes. I kind of want to give like an overview of some of the stuff, and then I'm gonna turn it over to you for the floor, because I really want to hear. I know a little bit about your story. I've been talking to you for a little while now, but I want to get into the nitty gritty here.
All right.
If any of you guys, if any of you guys identify yourselves as in recovery, right, or part of a sobriety community, and you've paid attention at all to the news the past few weeks, you've heard the term California sober, right? It's been all over the media. A popular singer, Demi Lovato, has had a lot of the circumstances of her own challenges with opioid addiction made public. She's spoken a lot about it, had a few near-death experiences herself, in and out of rehab, the whole thing, okay? But what's made the news is when she filmed a couple documentaries, went on the Joe Rogan podcast and talked about being this, quote-unquote, California sober, okay? Which I actually had never heard before. Even though I was introduced to recovery in California. But apparently the term California sober was an old, tongue-in-cheek expression to identify somebody who had stopped drinking alcohol, but who now smokes marijuana, okay? Although in Demi's case, she also admits to drinking in moderation, so the term doesn't quite fit exactly. But the reason, I think that it drums up so much controversy is because there are a lot of people who have been educated about or indoctrinated into opioid addiction treatment, in such a way that full abstinence, okay, which is to say abstinence from any of these commonly considered addictive drugs, is the only viable and sustainable approach to recovery. And the legal system plays into that too. We have drug courts where the sentencing options, will be greatly reduced if you abstain from the particular drugs that the court tells you to abstain from. And if you don't, then you're either going to jail or you're paying more money or something. And keep in mind that even that term full abstinence gets a little fuzzy, because you could say, well, how about caffeine and nicotine? Aren't they mood altering and addictive? So there's some debate once in a while there. But mostly the abstinence model of addiction recovery would claim that no one with an opioid addiction will be able to successfully use marijuana. The talking points here will be that the use of any mind-altering drug will eventually lead back to your drug of choice, which in this case, we're talking about opioids. So we've had some good guests already in the show address that topic a little bit. Most of them have had some experience with the 12-step groups. And although each guest was open-minded, of course, about the whole topic, they still were themselves fully abstinent. Okay. What I'm excited about with this episode is that we have a guest who had a severe opioid addiction, like the others, like mine, no better or no worse, is recovering from that, is removed from that, and who also regularly, smokes cannabis and outright rejects most of this mainstream approach to recovery, which has dominated the culture for almost 100 years, despite its absolutely horrible long-term success rates. Rene and I have interacted like a lot online. I have a good feel for his stance and his perspectives on a lot of these topics. I know that he feels strongly about like a lot of this stuff, and I know that other people feel this way too. And he's got a pretty wild story that I've only heard in bits and pieces. So I am looking forward to knowing more. So with that, Rene, glad to have you on. Thank you for taking the time. I do want to hear your story. You've told me the amounts of some of the stuff you were taking, and you're one of the only people actually, in terms of quantity, at least, that got up to some of these numbers that I did. And that's not because, I was some superhuman or anything, but with the opioids, given enough time and enough access, and if you're not dealing with these randomly laced fentanyl products or something, the tolerance can just go right to the ceiling. So you want to just kind of start by telling the listeners a little bit about you, a little bit about like your story.
Well, I mean, the truth is I bought into this recovery story. I bought into AA and the 12 steps. I was a big book thumper. I had a sponsor that was a guru, is a guru, who had the guru as his guru.
Where was this? So where in the country?
This was in the New England area.
Okay.
His guru's out of Colorado. I'm not going to throw names. That ain't the way, So I failed my way and researched my way to addiction is a trauma response and addiction is a choice, which is very controversial. The phenomenon of craving I bought into, hook, line, and sinker. I bought into the mental obsession, this persistent and reoccurring thought that doesn't respond to reason, that is intrusive, right? All these things. I know the big book in and out. Like I chased the solution and the steps, and like I wanted to get better from day one. 24 years old, I went to my first detox center. Like, this is it. I was only doing like 280s a day, eating them. I had never snorted cocaine. Like, you know what I mean?
That's enough, by the way. I mean, it's funny, like when you get up into these like huge quantities, we can look back and say 280s per day is nothing. It's like for most people, like 160 milligrams of oxycodone. That's enough. That's enough.
Oh, that's an enormous habit, right?
Yeah.
Because back in the day, all there is 5 or 10 milligram Loratabs or Percocets, and then the 80s come on the market, and like you said, basically the body is absolutely amazing. What it can tolerate, what it can go up to, how it can recover from, and fortunately or unfortunately, I've experienced that pain.
What actually brought you into rehab like that first time? So like when you were 24, you said that you were
intervention.
Okay. So your family was like, "Hey, look, this is getting crazy now." What year was that?
2001. So I started doing
Okay.
oxys 1999, right? Nobody even knows what they are then.
No, that was yeah, brand new. I mean, they came out in '97, but but it took a while for them to start really kind of hitting the mainstream in terms of like uh, you know, selling this stuff, right? For us to
Yeah.
kind of realize that we can actually sell this stuff, a lot of course, the pill mills and everything, and it was starting to get diverted. Yeah, right around 99, 2000. So you were
First of the Mohicans,
at the
man. Like
cutting edge. Yeah, you were at the cutting edge.
dude, the shame, the guilt. Like my parents talk about going to the grocery store, like hiding out. Like I was a three-sport all-state athlete
Mm,
that was the first, like, got strung out. Like I didn't know what I didn't know. No one sat me down at 24 and said, right, like, what's going on with your emotions, your coping skills, trauma. Why are you taking these drugs? Like I was Proposition 48, so I had lost a Division I scholarship. I turned to drugs and alcohol. I was just having a good time, and then I went for help,
what
and
is
they told
that?
me I had a
What
disease.
is that Proposition 48?
Like you got to get cleared by the NCAA to get a Division I or II scholarship, and
Okay.
like I had high enough SAT grades, and I was always in and out of trouble in high school, so my high school grades affected my NCAA. Like you got to get cleared to be eligible for a scholarship.
Okay.
And I ended up playing two sports in Division III, but it wasn't a challenge. I was depressed. I had anxiety, but I didn't know what that was. You
Yeah.
know?
Were you into drugs like in high school? I mean, is that what you mean by trouble? Like,
No, I mean, it was like I was a late bloomer.
yeah.
Started smoking weed and drinking. Said I'd never, totally against pills, totally against pharmaceuticals,
Yeah.
totally, you know what I mean? Like I'm going D1, I'm going pro. Whether I was good enough or not, like that was the dream.
Yeah.
And I found Oxycontin.
How'd you find OxyContin?
I sought it out. Like I remember,
Did you get
like
into like Vicodin first, and then someone was like, "Hey, look, this is it's a cleaner way to do that."
it was. I just remember like the stories of it. It's 16 perks in one.
Yeah.
This is back in the day. Like even
Yeah.
remembering this is kind of. But like back then, it was I was popping 5 milligram perks of Vikes, like what you could get, what you could con off the dentist back then, to get
Yeah.
a refill, but nothing crazy, nothing.
So it didn't really get rolling until the after high school. It's kind of like what I'm hearing, right? Like
Yeah, I
in
mean
those couple
college.
years.
Yeah, like I'm playing sports, I'm drinking, I'm turning to substances to deal with my emotions. Like I don't even know what emotions are at that age. Like
Yeah.
like raised
Did,
in Boston, blue collar, just pick yourself up from your bootstraps type.
yeah. Did you have that experience? So most of the people that I have been talking to already, and I had this experience where, uh, where you take your first Percocet or your first Vicodin, and it's like this spiritual experience, basically. Where you take something and it's like, oh my God, I
Oh
just
yeah,
fell in love.
found God. It was like, oh my God, this is what the Catholic Church was talking about.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And
Because me and Catholicism didn't really vibe. I was always getting kicked out of CCD for asking questions.
what do you mean? They asked some questions that they couldn't answer. You mean?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Okay, so all right, so you kind of first start getting like, into that kind of stuff. You realize that it's doing for you what you couldn't do for yourself. And maybe some of the stuff with the sports is starting to probably happen simultaneously. Sort of like what I'm hearing. Whether the performance in these sports was degrading because of the drugs, or whether it was the other way around. You started getting into drugs, and then everything else kind of started falling apart. What happened? Like, why did your family first intervene? Like, what were you doing that they were noticing? Like, were you still living with them? Were you,
Yep.
nodded out like all day long, and they knew you were taking? Because that stuff was also $50 a pill back then. So you're spending like $100
Yeah, back then they were 40 or 50 and they went to 80. I'm from Boston, bro. Everything went up to $1 a milligram from the rip.
Oh,
Boston was
really?
at the epicenter of this whole, it was Boston and Kentucky
Yeah.
back in the day, you know?
Yeah.
And back when I was, all the kids from Charlestown were robbing pharmacies and stuff. So
Mm.
it was pretty crazy up there. Like they had big signs in the windows, we do not carry Oxycontin. That was the
Yeah.
early 2000s. Like I remember that.
Oh man, so you were right. Yeah, yeah. I mean, you were right there. You were right
Yeah.
at the center of this whole thing unfolding. So like, the public still doesn't really know too much about it. We're starting to hear a little bit about it on the local news. Your parents saw it. They see you. They might have an idea of kind of what you're doing, and then what they say, you're either going to rehab or you're getting kicked out of the house, kind of thing.
I was willing to go. See, that's what I didn't know my story until just recently, that my story is about when I went for help.
Mm.
But yeah, they just, a good buddy of mine said, "Hey, kid's doing pills," and I've been doing them and selling them for a few years. I was the kid selling candy in middle school, just an entrepreneur that ended up being a misguided entrepreneur that fell into the drug game, you know?
Yeah. Okay. So then you go to treatment. Treatment. So back in 99, 2000, treatment, the approach anyway for a lot of these mainstream rehabs, they hasn't really changed too much. Okay. That the idea is that, you have a disease. Okay. You have an allergy to, to all this stuff, but, it doesn't matter if it's alcohol, opiates, amphetamines, it's all kind of considered quote unquote alcohol in any form. You can't do any of this stuff. Abstinence is the way. Obviously nobody, we sort of challenge it in terms of like we try to not, we try to find a way to use responsibly, but we don't challenge it like in terms of thinking that there is any other way, because that was just it, right? This is all the powers that be, all the people inside there, all the people that we're looking to, like you said, gurus, the people that we see inside meetings, people that are doing better now, they have all subscribed to this idea. So we don't, like most of us don't really challenge that. You bought into it. I assume that you became, completely abstinent, right? You got off it, for a certain period of time. Kind of pick up from there. Like, what did that look like? How long did you stay off? How did you feel while you were off? How did
it was quite a journey over, I'd probably been to 75 different places.
75
Detox,
what? Rehabs?
Detox, rehab.
Wow.
Somewhere, right? I mean, for 20 years, right? Do 5 a year. We're at 100.
Yeah.
I was always trying. Back then, no Obamacare, no insurance. I'm a suburban kid that ended up in a state-funded detox, right? Told look to the left, look to the right. It hasn't changed. Like you said, I was told look to the left, look to the right. If 1 out of the 3 of you make it, you'll be lucky. Jails, institutions, and death. You have a disease. You're powerless to change it. You have to abstain from everything for the rest of your life. And I was 24 years old.
It's a tough message to swallow. Yeah,
I bought it. And then, right, let's say up and down, some failures. I've tried it all. Methadone clinic. Like I said, I was, dude, 30, 60, 30s a day. I was up to like 300 milligrams of methadone. Like I've kicked, right? And I went full abstinent, and I did a 180 with my life. I was a junkie that gained weight. So I gained 100 pounds, right? So I lost all that weight, full in on the steps at this point, get into yoga, get into spiritual.
What age is this? You're kind of like, walk me along the timeline.
2005 to 2010. Let's just say I had 5 years clean, turned my life around.
Oh, you had 5 years. You were
basically
the 12-step way.
100% in.
And this is
recovered,
roughly ages 30 to 35 ish, somewhere like in that
27 to 32.
Okay.
And then I went on a run from hell from 32 to 40.
Okay. So in this time span, can you kind of walk me through, like, what were you, especially with the 12 steps? Because I've heard you speak in opposition to them now, or at least, challenging like a lot of this accepted dogma. So I want to kind of hear where you moved, because you were in it, right? So you were in it. You were, I assume, sponsoring people, working the
Whole
12 steps of
deal,
recovery.
amends, like full on in,
Okay. Okay. So they kind of walk me through from age like 32 into what happened. Like, how did you move from that spot into this kind of run from hell, like you're just talking about?
Right. So I lived through the South Florida pill mill days, get my life together in the middle of all that, got a bunch of money saved away, lose 130 pounds, become a yoga teacher. I decide to reward myself with a surgery.
I didn't know this part of your story.
Yeah. And get the skin cut off from all the weight that I lost because it was so uncomfortable.
Oh, wow. So you lost that much weight?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, right. 2 sport athlete, 6'1", 225 to 340, right, in my active addiction. So I'm obese, man.
Like in your active addiction. Okay, so I thought this happened kind of right after. All right, so in your mid-20s, so say from age 24 to 27, you had gained all that weight, right? You were living that way for a while. You do get completely abstinent in the 12 steps around age 27. Somewhere in those first couple of years, you really kind of went in, got into fitness and like you said, yoga, that kind of stuff. And then you lost all that weight. So you really didn't, that you went back basically to where you were essentially.
Oh, I was in the best shape of my life. If I was ever in that shape playing ball, they would have held the scholarship for me, even if I was 48. Like I just went all in, dude. Better. I go all in. When I go all in, I'm assuming we're similar. Like I go all in. When I do dope, I do dope. When I sell dope, I sell dope. When I get in shape, I get in shape. When I read books, I read books. I'm about it,
I can relate.
That's why we vibe, right? Like attracts like. Like that's what it is. It's all energy.
Dude, I talk about fitness too. I have this video that it's on my IGTV tab in my Instagram. It was one of the first kind of long form videos that I did, and it was me kind of working through like my own struggles with where is fitness, where is the line between a passion, a compulsion, and an addiction. All right, because a lot of us, like, the lines are very blurry. I have found that a lot of us do not really know what a passion is. We don't really even understand the word passion. We go right from interest to addiction, right? So I mean, I'm kind of, here I am, sort of 5 years removed from this stuff, but I am walking through like my own issues and these own things that kind of come up in my own life, thinking where is this a healthy new lifestyle versus where do I see a lot of the similarities with some of the older kind of stuff. So anyway, I guess my point is that I can relate. Yeah.
It's not a bad thing. Like, this is what I'm learning is like, greatness takes obsession. Greatness takes, you know what I mean? Like, and addiction, I was disciplined. I really was. You know what I mean? It's just that story was never posed to me. That I was pretty disciplined in my addiction, like to do the things I did. But all that was told to me was that I was powerless and I had a disease. It had never been posed to me that I was in control. Because if I said that, you're arrogant. You don't get it. You got to leave the cult.
Yeah. And I was talking with Jen about this a little bit in episode 2. Yeah, there is a lot of pressure, and this is kind of one of the reasons that I even started doing, kind of started speaking the way that I'm speaking, and I started reaction recovery, and the whole reaction part of reaction recovery is it was a reaction to what I am seeing and experiencing myself. Okay, now I was brought in through the 12-step groups. I am still a part of that group now. Like, my experience looks a little bit different than it did in the very, very beginning versus kind of where it does now. But the reaction part was that there's something in there that just didn't feel completely right, and that has sparked this whole couple-year journey into me talking with people. I mean, I try to talk with as many people with as many different perspectives, and I don't just want to hear, because this was my frustration. Okay, like my frustration was, I have some thoughts, I have some things that maybe aren't sitting right with me, but if you try to voice them, you get immediately crushed, right? I mean, you get, you basically get laughed at to the point where you're either going to leave because you don't want to be laughed at, or you're going to just stop talking that way. And a lot of people do. I mean, look, if you're a part of something that is the only thing that is starting to stabilize your life, and if you are told that you really shouldn't be talking or thinking, a certain way, if you want, if this is the only thing between me and life itself, I'm gonna conform to that, of course. Okay, so yeah, so I have had that same experience that you're kind of describing here. Now I think you ended up going much further in the other directions, which is why I invited you on today too, because I do like to hear that perspective. I just started doing this kind of stuff where I'm talking, I'm listening to people. I want to hear all kinds of different, and certainly with the California sober, how popular that has been in the news the last couple of weeks. And even with that, like, I'm going to let you finish telling your story, but with that also, like this idea that there are a lot of formerly opioid addicted people, who use marijuana still and who use cannabis still, and this idea that those people don't exist, that's not true. And I think for a lot of us that are viewing something through the prism of the 12 steps, and if that is your experience, it becomes easy to think that these people do not exist, that they're not out there, because I'm not seeing them, or at least I'm not hearing about them, right? It's like, are there people that go to 12-step groups that are taking this and that are just not sharing it with the group? Obviously 100%. There are, but I might not know about them.
So right, I was living in Maine, and I had a cannabis company in Maine, and one of my buddies owns a dispensary delivery service up there, and he's like, Rene, half the people in AA smoke weed. So it's
now,
like,
when is it
lying?
What year was this that he was saying this?
A year or two ago.
Okay,
and this is it. He's in the 12 steps. He was hiding the fact that he ran a dispensary because of the judgment in the 12 steps. You feel me? So
yeah.
That's what, like, Demi Lovato got pimped out by the treatment industry. Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
Like, that poor girl, I can only imagine the trauma she endured through treatment. I endured tons of trauma through treatment. We don't talk about trauma. We don't talk about any of the things that actually could provide a solution. We put a Band-Aid over it and tell you have a disease. Like, if I can smoke weed, and I'm not like saying everybody should smoke weed, the way that I stumbled upon cannabis was the withdrawal pain was so great. I was 9 months abstinent. I thought I had to be abstinent. I was taking CBD. I diagnosed myself as having a brain injury because, dude, coming off that amount of opioids, like, dude, I didn't sleep for like almost 2 years. Like, really.
Yeah.
Like,
wow.
Like, my brain, I didn't even know if I was ever going to be able to put a sentence together. Like, and I got people to vouch for that.
Yeah.
And I went to my boy's dispensary, and no intention of consuming THC. I thought, if I consume THC, I'm going to shoot heroin and die. Right. And I bought a CBD tincture, and it happened to have THC in it. And I took it. I went to my buddy's house that owns the dispensary. I did an IV vitamin treatment. Like, I was all in, dude. You know what I mean? Like, IV vitamins, like, I'll try. I'm a guinea pig.
Yeah.
I just want to move on with my life.
Well, hold on. So I do want you to kind of backtrack a little bit, because I do feel like you went from age 32, and then you kind of talked about this, like, 10-year run. So you jumped over. I want to kind of, were you during this 9-year run that you talk about, where you went back into oxys, back into, you had been completely off. Right? You had been 5 years abstinent. You went back. Things got kind of crazy for those years. Were you trying to get back into the 12 steps and back into
Constantly.
the same life that you had? Were you back? Were you going to rehabs? Were you still doing playing the whole treatment game during this whole time?
Whole thing, man. This is it's like, right. So trying to tell my story. I don't even care about my story. I just want the person to hear me that like is gonna give it another, not quit. One more time. I've tried 5,000 fucking times, man, and it's stuck. Get the fuck back up. Get up. No matter what. Get up and try again. If it means not listening to everyone, like listen to yourself is what I learned. But we'll go back to the surgery, which ends up being one of those synchronistic things years later. So I get a surgery, I get prescribed Oxycontin, oxycodone. I take it for 3 weeks as prescribed, less than as prescribed, right? That's supposedly not supposed to be able to happen based on this disease theory, based on this phenomenon of craving. And I remember even talking to my sponsor about it.
I was going to ask that, yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, he's the one who pushed the whole surgery and all that, like whatever. Didn't push it, but co-signed it, right? My family was all against it. Like I was off the chain in the pill mill days. And then I get sober and get my life together. And I come up with this idea to get a surgery. Asinine. It ends up being a great lesson because I take Oxycontin, oxycodone as prescribed for 3 weeks. I end up going on an 8-year run, but it all ties in synchronistically to me taking that CBD THC tincture and realizing, dude, it's all bunk. It's all a choice. It's all on you. It's the little things, right? Jordan Peterson, all that, the little things you do day in and day out. And it's an unhealthy coping skill. It's a bad habit. Like, so it, you know what I mean? One thing led to another. That was in 2010. I got my life together in 2018.
Yeah. Okay. So you had that surgery in 2010, and then what happened in like 2018? You know, so you're still in and out of these treatment centers before then. You're still thinking that that you have to be fully abstinent to recover, and you're basically killing yourself at this entire time, going back and forth, back and forth. God only knows that what we go through those last few years before we actually get separated from opioids is nothing other than hell. I mean, it gets like that found God experience that you were talking about when you were like 18 years old. It's like that experience is long gone. This is not. This is now that same heaven that has now turned into hell for a lot of us. So now it's 2018. Are you back into treatment now? Or like, how do you finally? So you have not used opioids since then? Is that right?
I had what you want to call a dark night of the soul that ties into the surgery last year, where I come up with it's a choice. Like I reached my emotional set point. What was it? Last March. I didn't know it, and I chose to get high. But I didn't even mean to choose to get high. And that's where the whole thing ties into subconscious beliefs, the thoughts I think, like all this, woo-woo type, Tony Robbins type stuff that I'm like, wow, I'm the power. I'm in control. I control this shit. These people don't know what they're talking about, and they may be abstinent, but they're miserable. Look at the quality of their life, all this stuff, which of course now I'm being judgmental, right? They just get the perfect way to gaslight you.
Did you read something that made you start thinking like this, or did it just kind of come upon you?
It had been from the beginning, right? I was a street kid at 27 that hadn't read anything but High Times and Sports Illustrated that started reading, and then went back to college and discovered the library and realized, hey, you can meet a nice girl in yoga or the library. Like,
okay. So your whole life kind of changed, in terms of you being this, seeker of drugs to you becoming this seeker of knowledge. And I can relate to that to in terms of having never read about this kind of stuff. And then once you start doing it, it's like a snowball effect. You want to just keep learning more. And then you find like an author or a speaker, that I talk about, like Gabor Mate a lot. And then he will reference other people. There will be the same several people that he's talking about, Dan Siegel and Peter Levine and like all these different, maybe trauma researchers. And then you start reading all their books, and then they start referencing people, and then you start reading their books. And then all of a sudden you go from, especially trauma, you go from knowing nothing about how that plays into addiction to suddenly you have this in like a year, 2 years, 3 years time. You have this whole understanding of something that was never there for 30 some years in your life. So, it sounds like you went that same kind of route that I did in terms of the seeking part.
Even when I was getting high, I was reading, trying to find a way out. Like, people didn't want to get high with me because I talked about getting sober.
Yeah.
Like, because I had 180'd my life. I had experienced like what hard work, discipline, dedication. Like, I didn't know anything about the stock market. I made a couple $100,000 in the stock market. Like, I was like, whoa. And then what I learned was subconscious, was childhood trauma, self-sabotage. I self-sabotaged, and I chose heroin, opiates to be like my way to self-sabotage. There's no surefire way other than to catch a habit, right? And what did I just call it? Catch a habit to destroy your life.
Yeah. So like in terms of this California sober, okay. So I'll just say that one thing that like I wasn't sure about was why the word, sober had to be like in that phrase and all. And I've heard you've commented, a couple of times. I've read stuff that you've written. So I do want to hear your thoughts. Kind of one thing that that I have noticed from a lot of these, just the recovery fellowships, the kind of sobriety communities, is people get very protective over that word, right? So, just in the sense of it, like I just heard somebody, like making like an argument about that word being like misappropriated, okay, so to speak. So like when somebody is saying that they're drinking and using marijuana, some people get confused. Like, why do we have to use the word sober in that context at all? Like why use the word? So do you identify yourself as being sober? Like, how do you like describe your journey away from where you were to right now, like in terms of semantics anyway?
No labels, no identities. Identities will keep you sick, in my opinion. I bought into the identity of an alcoholic. So it was a self-fulfilling prophecy. California sober, like, dude, I'm me. I'm Renee St Pierre III, and I happen to consume cannabis today. I choose to do it. If I choose not to do it tomorrow, so be it. No one ever told me I had a choice, Jeff, right? I wanted to get sober from day one, but they told me I had a disease. And then I've seen, that's why you talk about Gabor Mate, behavior addictions. I could go on and on about what I've seen in AA and the 12 steps and behavioral addiction.
Yeah.
And that's okay. We co-sign that. We look the other way about the way this guy's treating a girl, about what he's doing with gambling, about what's going on behind closed doors. As long as he doesn't use, right? But then I know you had the experience I had. When you do choose to get high or relapse, what happens? Everyone turns their back on you.
Yeah.
You're like, I don't even have the words for it. That's trauma.
That was trauma. And I had that experience actually. So the one thing that I have noticed, and I've heard this from a lot of people. So there is something that happens, especially like in these 12-step groups, like when you were dying from this particular drug addiction, all right, and it is like destroying your life, and then you get paired up with a group where you can identify that other people have felt that way. They don't feel that way anymore, and they're talking about unconditional love. There's something that is incredibly attractive about it, right? So it is like, oh my God, I really thought that there was no way out, and now for the first time in a while, I don't believe that anymore. All right, so this was like 2012, 2013 for me. It was this experience, and I met a lot of good people. A lot of people were there for me. And then as soon as I started like using again, it was a pretty complicated process because I needed things, paper signed for like administrative courts. And I needed like, a lot of people to like write letters. So I didn't necessarily want to keep this like relapse secret. All right. But if I kind of came clean, then I felt like it was going to completely destroy all of like the administrative stuff. Cause I mean, they were like, you had 100% abstinence or everything was going to fall apart. So I didn't like the fact that I was not telling people about it. But as soon as this came out, yeah, you really can't hide some of that kind of stuff forever. Everybody completely pulled away. And it was so all of these relationships and this unconditional love. It turns out that it was conditional after all. It was conditioned. It was conditioned on the fact that I don't, take these particular pills anymore. And then once I started taking them, yeah. So that was an experience. And then it was actually hard for me to get back into that group once I moved back to Pennsylvania. So yeah, I talk about that a lot. I'm pretty open with that experience, and I do think that like when I talk about the 12-step groups, I think that I'm like one of the few people that really tries to walk like right down the center line, in terms of I can see it pretty clearly, I think, from both perspectives. So like I'm not in any camp, and I'm not in any kind of, I don't believe that one thing, this is the thing that works for everybody, because I've seen a lot of people get better and struggle in all kinds of different ways. And that's why like I love talking with somebody like you, somebody who I can relate to this. I mean, you had the same experience, the same relationship with oxycodone that I did. It was a bad one. It was one that started off as a love affair, and then it turned into a horribly abusive, toxic relationship. And but I mean, just like me and just like you right now, we are two people that have had this experience that don't have that experience today. You're not detoxing from opiates today. I'm not either. I woke up, I wasn't doing that. I'm gonna go to bed tonight, and I have a good feeling I'm gonna be going to bed without that stuff in my system. So I guess like my now with marijuana, it's funny too, because so I have not smoked marijuana since I was 22. And the reason is because it started making me super paranoid, and that's the reason I stopped. Like, not for any other reason, that it was just really like screwing me up. Okay, so even now, like, I don't ever feel any kind of urge to use that particular substance, because I remember how that was for me. So like with you, did you always like marijuana? Like, did you always have a good relationship with it?
Yeah, I did. I
Yeah.
always knew like alcohol wasn't, but yeah, I saw through the bullshit back in the day, right?
Mm.
My dream was to own a dispensary, right? And that came to, I don't have a dispensary, but I started my own cannabis business, which, right, 12 steps told me I couldn't do, because what was it? I was being clean and living dirty, something like that, right? Like, but I have a legal registered business with the state of Maine, living my childhood dream of growing cannabis that's now legal.
Mm.
So it's always, like I said, all I read in high school was High Times and Sports Illustrated.
Mm.
My original dream was to grow weed and invest in real estate. That's what I'm doing now, right? Like, that's the plan.
So you're living the dream.
I
You're
mean, in a
literally
way,
your dream.
100%. I just came from Atlanta writing a book. I knew I was going to write a book 15 years ago, but I knew it wasn't going to be about the pill mills. Like,
Mm.
I didn't know it was going to be that the 12 steps is a cult, and like the treatment industry's rigged, and that for the ones it works for is great. But for the ones that run out of insurance, and the ones that are like kicking it on the side of Dixie Highway right now, that came from Kentucky or Ohio or wherever, their insurance is invalid. So they're invalid to society, except for Broward County Jail, right? And go be on the chain gang in Florida. Like, I caught a case and faced life in prison in 2012. So like that added to my addiction too. Like, literally, I was cooking a steak in my backyard. Neighbor attacked me, called the police. I was on the clinic. I was detoxing on the clinic. Like, I just read about that kid. Like, I went from 120 down to 50, called the police. I get arrested, no bond, facing life in prison. So more trauma, but that's normal. Like, that became normal, right? That went on for 6 years. Once that ended, that's when I got into treatment for the who knows how many time in 2018.
Oh, all
no
right.
one
So you did go
because
to, but you did go to treatment like this last time. Like when you had this
yes.
dark night of the soul, like you were just like describing. This was coming out of a treatment center. And they were telling you the same thing that you had been told for the past 20 years. You know, they're like, you need to quit everything.
Mhm.
And then you got in there and then you quit everything. And then they did you just like at some point just, say, screw you guys. I've been playing this 12-step abstinence based game for 20 years. Things have not gotten better. I'm going to do it my way.
Basically, I looked around and I observed, and like my guru had got me a scholarship to a treatment center. I ended up in Portland, Maine. I ended up running a sober house, and I observed, and I went, "This is toxic.
Yeah.
This is insane." Right? Homeboys getting homegirl down the street pregnant with 3 months clean, and like that's like the gold standard of recovery. Like the dude that's got the best recovery. How many girls can I get? Like I'm 43, dude. I've been in and out of the game for 20 years. You think I care about some girl in AA? Like my wife's the bomb. She's a pharmacist. Like she stood by me.
Yeah.
And this is the gold standard. Like, get the fuck out of here.
Yeah. So then what about like uh one of the topics that I talk about a lot is like recovering in community. It's kind of like however like that looks, just it's like we can't do this alone. It is such like we're up against, a pretty formidable foe in terms of the statistics, at least, right? Like most people who develop these really serious opioid addictions, like you have, like I have, the people that I have, spoken with already, that we can't just kind of, white knuckle it in our basements ourselves. They can expect to just like long term kind of get better. Are you paired up with like other people that have been through that yourself, like in any kind of way? Like do you connect with other people that are doing it the way you have, or are you just like on
It's
your own deal?
I kind of led the way and attracted a crew.
Mm,
And along the years, like I tend to attract real people, like really real, like yourself. I know you're real without even knowing you. I just know you're real. I just
mm,
know, right? And I look back, and every single one of those people consumes cannabis. I led the way. They thought they were about to shoot heroin. They called me. I'm like, yo, bro, chill.
mm.
I've been smoking weed for this long. But if I was ashamed and I was terrified and I hid out and didn't tell anyone, it took a while. And then God presented these opportunities for these people that I was kind of like, they're like my boys, but kind of like guiding them and whatever. And I was like, yo, dude, I've been consuming cannabis for 6 months or 9 months, by mistake, it didn't set off the phenomenon of craving. I've used it to meditate. I've used it to get in touch with my body. Like the
Yeah.
body talks to you, like all that trauma is in my body. That's where yoga comes in.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yoga has become, especially, well, I was getting into yoga before I learned about this kind of stuff, but reading The Body Keeps the Score, Bessel van der Kolk, one of the top trauma researchers of all time, he's been at the ground level working with people. They've tried all kinds of talk therapy kinds of things. And he has a lot of things to say about those approaches, not because he didn't try them himself, but he says, look, like I've been following the research for long periods of time, and the trauma, like you said, gets trapped in the body, and we need to work that out. And there's different ways, and yoga, theater is another one that he talks about, but yoga is a big one. Okay, so I do kind of want to ask you maybe like one or two more things, and then we'll kind of wrap it up here. Um, uh, so why do you think that some of the folks in like in maybe more like mainstream like recovery get so passionate about like attacking somebody like you, okay, who has had the same experience as them, but is now just doing things like a little bit differently. Like I'll see you, commenting on my social media, and then people always are like responding to you, and you're kind of back and forth. I think you handle yourself great, by the way. Like, do you think that it's really because they're concerned about you personally and like your salvation, quote unquote, or do you think that it has more to do with them wanting to project their own tightly formed concept of addiction recovery onto everybody else?
It's a cult. Even when I was a part of the cult, I knew it was a cult. So I wasn't offended when you said it was a cult. Like Big Book Thumper, like I kind of knew I was part of a cult, but I didn't care. I don't know if I was offended, right? I gave it credit for saving my life because the 12 steps, everyone, I thought they saved my life. But it turns out I did the 12 steps. Turns out I wrote that inventory. Turns out I made those amends. Turns out I didn't use every day, right? Turns out I developed a relationship with God. It all came back to me, but they told me that was selfish and self-centered. Like Bill Wilson developed a perfect gaslighting. Like he tells half truths. It's half truths, right? It looks like, and then we formulate it backwards. Like, dude, when I was shooting 30 dilaudid a day, did I think that I could stop tomorrow and put my life together and lose 100? Well, I guess I did believe it because it happened, but you're like, bro, I can't even wake up without not wanting to kill myself.
I think that also why there's so much controversy, and it's like,
who cares, right? Who cares? Like, I just want to see you get better.
Well, that's the thing, is that in general, most people are not getting better, right? So, and it's like everybody knows people, everybody has, cousins or kids or aunts or parents that have been caught up in the middle of this thing. And we've all suffered like a lot during the last, 20 years of this opioid epidemic. In terms of a single treatment strategy, that has actually kind of produced the most, full-blown recovery over that period of time. The 12-step groups still have that. Like there's no one group that has produced more numbers of people that have recovered, but the overall, success rates are still low. So I think that that's where all the fighting is that there isn't, one particular thing that has kind of come out that we can point to. It's like, that's what everybody wants. But I think that that's what no one is ever going to get. Like, we're never going to get this one program that you just shuttle everybody into and there's a 90% success rate. And I think until that happens, and until one of them continues to be the most popular, there's just going to be fighting.
Divide and conquer. It's fight about nothing, right?
Yeah. Do you have any kids of your own?
No kids. I got a dog and my wife.
If you had, this is kind of maybe like a tough question to answer, but like if you had a child of your own and they were 18, like you were back then, starting with this stuff, and they came to you and said, hey, look, I developed this oxycodone addiction and I love this stuff, but it's also starting to really do some harm in my life. I've tried to stop. I haven't been able to. What kind of advice would you give to your own kid? I'm putting you on the spot with that one.
Right. It's going to sound like I'm a big David Goggins fan. I had to look in the mirror and say, you fat, obese fucking junkie, get your fat, fucking obese junkie ass in shape.
Now, you're not saying that to kindness, your son, right?
I'm saying that to myself, right?
Wow.
But I would tell him to look in the mirror and make better choices. Really simple. I would send him to a detox center, but I would say stay so far away from the 12-step cult that's going to brainwash you that you're powerless and you can't question that. Like breath works for me. Massages worked for me. Yoga, RTT, meditation, like, I'm going to get a brain scan, like all this different stuff. So I would never send them to a meeting. I'm so glad one of my first experiences at AA, right, 20 years ago was, your kind's not welcome, kid, right? I was an Oxycontin addict. They told me to go to NA. Well, NA is a shit show. We all know that. Like, you just look at, oh, whoa, okay, forget it. And I ended up back in AA being told, I spilt more booze than you. Buddy, I do oxys. Who the hell would drink? Oxys are way better.
So you did go to AA though. Like that was your 12-step fellowship of choice over that time.
Yeah, I was a big book thumper. I bought in. I wanted to be recovered. And I got recovered, but if you get recovered, you can get unrecovered. And it doesn't mean you're a horrible person if you relapse and then everyone shames you, and right then those abandonment issues are just ripped open, but you don't even know what the fucking abandonment issue is because you bought into that these people cared about you.
Yeah. Well, I think that is, that is something that definitely happened to me. A lot of that, like betrayal kind of stuff is what it feels like, because I had that experience when I was younger, and like a lot of that did get triggered. I mean, thankfully I have, found my way back since then, but you're right. There's a lot of, I mean, look, this is not a, those groups are not trauma processing facilities. These are not trauma researchers, trauma therapists, trauma informed clinical staff. So there's a lot of good that can be done. There's a lot of harm that that can be done, and it's a difficult thing. Man, I have really enjoyed this this conversation. It's been great getting to hear your story. You're such an interesting guy. I've enjoyed our time interacting on social media. It's funny, like I've been on Instagram for almost 2 years now, and I've gotten a feel for people who engage with the content, simply to like start a fight. Okay, like trolls, for example, and then people who are honestly sharing their thoughts, even if it's in disagreement with the majority of the people. And you've never struck me as trolly at all. I read all your comments, even the long ones. Like I told you, I appreciate every single one of them. Obviously, that we don't agree on everything. Our paths have not looked identical, but look, like what two paths have looked identical? I love hearing as many different perspectives like about this stuff as possible, and it really helps me kind of get out of that just that like one size fits all model of recovery where we force abstinence on everybody, like, the second that they reach out for help. Ours is definitely, one that I value. So thank you. Do you want to just, tell people real quickly where they can find you if they want to reach out to you?
Yeah. Unconquered Healing on Instagram and Facebook. Just hit me up. If anybody needs help, if the 12 steps work for you, man, God bless you. Like, we can agree to disagree, right? Jeff is the one who showed me a few books that showed me the statistics, and I was like, oh, okay. So if you've struggled like me, basically it's like, we don't have to go about it the same way, but hit me up. Like, if you're confused, if you can't have conversations with 12-step people, like I know you can talk to Jeff, you can talk to me. Like, I'm really here to just help. Like, I really am. Like, unfortunately, God chose me to go through what I went through, and I tried to hide out and do my own thing, but like, I'm supposed to help people.
Yeah. All right. Randy, I look forward to talking with you more, following along with you and your story as you continue to thrive on the other side of this epidemic. So talk soon.
Thanks, Jeff.